Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness video, where today we're going to be using the Hitmon trio of Hitmonchan, Hitmonlee, and Hitmontop. I think that these three iconic fighting types are going to do very well through the game. However, there is one small hiccup right at the beginning, and that's the fact that we're not going to start with all three. Instead, we're going to start with Tyrogue, who is quite possibly the worst baby Pokemon. And that's because it only has 35 in each of its stats, meaning that it doesn't take hits well, doesn't do damage well, and can't outspeed most things. But I guess as they say, no pain, no gain, and for this Pokemon it is very applicable. And to make matters worse, it only gets the move Tackle by level up, so I will have to be relying on Tutor and TM moves until it evolves to level 20. The other problem with that is that it does not get any of the TMs that you can get in the early game. So that really just leaves the Tutor Lady, who luckily does give us a pretty strong move, but we'll get to that in just a moment. First we have to go over our Tyrogue in particular, who has a jollier nature, raising its speed but lowering its special attack, which I think is honestly a pretty good nature for it. It gets access to the Guts ability, which raises its attack by 50% when it's either burned, paralyzed, or poisoned, which could definitely come in handy. And of course, according to Bulbapedia, it only gets Tackle by level 10. So with that, the first thing that we need to do is teach Seismic Toss at the Tutor Lady. That way I can actually deal decent damage. And, oh, would you look at that? Another Tyrogue. Hello, other Tyrogue. Goodbye, other Tyrogue. And surprisingly, we actually make it to the old man fairly quickly, only arriving at level 15, and that's because I want Tackle to do as much damage as it can without me over leveling too much. Unfortunately, even at level 15, it's still not a one-shot, but it does go down after just a couple hits, and then out comes the Shroomish. Now, Horsey could be a bit of an issue because it has a pretty decent defense stat, but luckily I do just have Seismic Toss to bypass that altogether, which it goes down in 2 hits, and then all that's left is a Shroomish, which should suffer a very similar fate. One hit takes it down below half. Absorb might have taken it out of range, but it actually is perfect and takes it down anyway. So with that, at level 20, our Tyrogue evolves into Hitmonlee. Okay, that is probably the best one it could have been, especially with the jolly nature. And also at level 20, it gets the move Brick Break. Now we can go over all 3 Hitmons because they have a lot going on. Hitmonchan has 50 HP, 105 attack, 79 defense, 35 special attack, 110 special defense, and 76 speed. Hitmonlee has 50 HP, 120 attack, 53 defense, 35 special attack, 110 special defense, and 87 speed. And Hitmontop has 50 HP, 95 attack, 95 defense, 35 special attack, 110 special defense, and 70 speed. And as you expect from a boxer, Hitmonchan gets a whole bunch of punching moves, including the 3 elemental punches, which is going to be very nice. Hitmonlee, however, mostly relies on kicks, so it gets a lot of the kicking moves. However, it also does have its arms, so it does get Brick Break, which is just a reliable fighting type move at 75 base power and 100 accuracy. And Hitmontop goes all in on kicks with triple kick and rolling kick. So the first thing to note is that Hitmonlee is very much the strong, fast physical attacker, with Hitmontop being the polar opposite, not being as strong but being more of a defensive wall, with Hitmonchan filling a role in the middle ground. And strangely enough, all these Pokemon have 110 special defense, which I never realized. I'll have to keep that in mind for future runs. Anyway, unfortunately, even though Hitmonchan does get all the elemental punches, it's only got 35 special attack, but it is our only real option for dealing damage that isn't normal, fighting, or dark. So with that, we go ahead and move on to our Hitmonlee in particular, that has the same jolly nature as before, but now gets access to the Limber ability, preventing paralysis, which is very nice, and of course at the level up, it got Brick Break. Now moving on to our Hitmonchan, it got a quiet nature, raising its special attack but lowering its speed. It's okay, it'll definitely help the elemental punches, but having the lower speed is definitely going to hurt. It gets the Keen Eye ability, preventing accuracy loss, and at level 20, Hitmonchan's signature move is Mach Punch, which is definitely a decent fighting type move. And finally, we have our Hitmontop, who has a calm nature, raising its special defense but lowering its attack. so at least it's a bit more of a wall. Unfortunately, it's not going to hit nearly as hard as it could. It gets the Intimidate ability, which is incredible. It lowers the opponent's attack stat whenever it enters the field, and with there being 3 Hitmons, it's definitely going to be even better. And its signature move at level 20 is Triple Kick. So with that, we go ahead and move on to the Power Rangers. I decided to fight Red today, and that's because I have super effective damage against this Houndour, and the Slugma can't really do much other than burn or poison us. The Houndour goes down in a single hit, and Brick Break beats Slugma down in a single hit as well. Now, before I even consider entering the building, the first thing I need to do is teach Mimic to one of my Pokemon. I decided Hitmontop, and that's because there is a Ghost type at the front entrance. Luckily, it does have Foresight, allowing me to hit it with Fighting type moves, and soon after, I catch this Numble for the Charcoal item, which raises Fire type damage by 10%. Anyway, moving on to the battle against Labrina, she leads with a Beautifly and a Love Disc. And unfortunately, Beautifly being a bug flying type actually 4 times resists my fighting type moves, so I do need to use Seismic Toss and Tackle to take it down. But luckily, once it does go down, out comes the Roselia, which also resists my fighting type moves because it is part poison type. So luckily, Tackle does take it down to half, meaning that Seismic Toss should finish it off, which it does, bringing out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. Now, because it is a pure normal type, I know that my fighting type moves will do a ton of damage to it. Mach Punch hits, taking it down to red, and Brick Break, of course, finishes it off. All that's left is the Love Disc, which definitely can't survive the onslaught of both of my Hitmons. And Labrina goes down, leading us to, of course, Pokemon XD's obligatory Mirabee. Hello, Mirabee. How are you doing today? Well, actually, there's a few things that happen here. Hitmonlee gets High Jump Kick, which is definitely a really strong fighting type move, and I catch the Voltorb for the Magnet item. Now the problem with High Jump Kick is that if it misses, it does a ton of damage in recoil. At level 26, Hitmonchan gets all of the elemental punches, and I teach Fire Punch over Tackle. At the Realgap Tower, I pick up my 2 favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect. I'm going to buy 3 of each, and I'm only going to use 1 for now, and that's on Hitmontop. And it is Hidden Power Fighting, which is pretty decent. Much later, I decide to go ahead and see what Hidden Power types the other 2 got, and Hitmonlee gets Hidden Power Water, which I don't end up ever teaching, and Hitmonchan gets Hidden Power Fighting of the same base power as Hitmontop. And that's because I forgot to randomize their IVs. But it shouldn't matter too much though. Anyway, we move on to the Tribulator to go pick a Body Slam for Hitmonlee, and I teach it over Tackle. And I pick up the Swine up here for the Never Melt Ice item to raise the damage of Ice type moves. Anyway, moving on to the battle against Snapple, he leads with a Quagsire and a Lantern, and I decide to lead with Hitmontop this time, and that's because I want to intimidate the Quagsire. That way its Rock Tombs and Slams aren't doing as much damage. Even though Rock Tomb isn't very effective anyway, it's still nice to lower the amount of damage it can do. Anyway, Quagsire goes down, and then out comes the Shadow Lunatone, which I need to take down quickly, otherwise it's going to set up Shadow Sky, dealing chip damage throughout the rest of the fight. At level 31, Hitmonlee does not learn Mind Reader because I don't even remember what that does. Cast Form nearly goes down to a Hidden Power Fighting, but not quite. I decide to High Jump Kick the Lantern and finish off the Cast Form with the second one, which brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Matang. Now, Matang really shouldn't be that much of a threat. It's nearly taken down by 1 High Jump Kick, and the Hidden Power finishes it off, leaving just the Lantern left, who does hit a High Power Flail, but it doesn't really do that much, and it goes down. At level 32, Hitmonchan gets Sky Uppercut, a much stronger fighting type move, but it does suffer a little bit of accuracy loss. I go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with an Electrode and a Nuzleaf. On the first turn, the Nuzleaf is always going to use Fake Out, so I go ahead and swap it into Hitmontop to Intimidate to lower that damage. And I go for High Jump Kick, which takes down Electrode immediately. Now I am risking Static, but I think it's worth the risk. Then out comes the Vileplume. I go for Body Slam into it, taking it below half, and Hidden Power Fighting nearly takes down the Nuzleaf, leaving it on just a sliver. Hitmonlee gets put to sleep, so I call it immediately to wake it up, and I decide to mimic Sleep Powder, thinking that this can come in handy later in the fight, maybe. I go for Body Slam once again to finish off the Vileplume. Then out comes the Whiscash. Go for Sleep Powder into it, putting it to sleep. Now I decide to High Jump Kick into the Whiscash, which unfortunately does miss, dealing a ton of damage to Hitmonlee, and I finish off the Nuzleaf. However, I think the correct play here probably would have been to finish off the Nuzleaf and then put Skarmory to sleep, and that's because Skarmory has Aerial Ace doing a ton of damage to all my Pokemon, taking Hitmontop down, and so I bring out Hitmonchan. Now, Whiscash is basically gone, and unfortunately Hitmonlee misses another high jump kick, taking itself down. I use a Fire Punch to take down Skarmory with a critical hit. Water Pulse hits, leaving Hitmonchan at 1 HP, and as long as I hit this move, I could have won there. Okay, well that's a little unfortunate. Go back into battle once again. And the thing is I really just need to take down this Electrode, so I go for a high jump kick, which I know takes it down a single hit, and I miss. Okay, well that's unfortunate, but it is only 90% accurate, and I miss a second one, taking Hitmonlee down without doing a single bit of damage. Okay, well I'm glad I decided to swap over to Fire Punch, but it's just not dealing the damage I was hoping it would. And Sky Uppercut, another 90% accurate move, missed. So that was 3 in a row, and that is very unfortunate. Luckily, on the third attempt, I'm able to get back to the Skarmory and the Whiscash. This time I instead decide to take out the Skarmory first, which is definitely the best choice. And at this point, I even have a full HP Hitmontop. But Whiscash goes down, and we finally get past Gonzap. At level 31, Hitmontop gets counter, which I teach over Triple Kick. And then I actually run into another Hitmontop. Hello, other Hitmontop. Goodbye, other Hitmontop. At the top of the tower, I go ahead and pick up the move Earthquake, which I teach to Hitmonlee, and protect a Hitmontop, and I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Celio and a Lairon. Now, on the first turn, the Lairon is always going to go for Protect, while the Celio is going to use Earthquake. Now, I decide to use Earthquake with the Hitmonlee, which I don't think is the best choice because Celio is part Ice type, so I think that just using Brick Break would have been better, which I figure out on the second turn, but it doesn't really matter too much. Now that Slowking is out, Lairon is going to repeat the same pattern as before, so I go for Body Slam into Slowking, getting a Paralysis, which unfortunately doesn't do well for the counter that I was relying on to deal damage to the Slowking to take it down, but that's alright. Out comes the Ursaring. Lairon goes for Iron Tail, doing a little bit of damage. I go for Earthquake and Protect now that both these Pokemon aren't going to be going for Protect, which it does take down the Lairon and takes Ursaring down fairly low. Then out comes Primeape. I decide to go for Brick Break into it, nearly taking it down. It hits a Shadow Rush, taking him on down to 6, but I finish off the Ursaring with another Hidden Power, which brings out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. Now I go for Body Slam into it, which luckily paralyzes. Hitmontop goes down, but Hitmonchan can come out. Shadow Storm hits, doing a little bit of damage to both. I go for Body Slam once again at Hypno, and finish off the Primeape with Fire Punch, which it does, and then all that's left is the Hypno, who's on a Sliver, and unless it gets a lucky crit like it did, there's really no threat, and it goes down. Now before I go on to the last area of the game, I go ahead and teach Double-Edged Hitmontop, and that's because it is getting quite low level compared to everyone else, and they are doing fairly well. Their only real time loss was Gonzap, which is just unfortunate, but I think that they can do really well if they get through the last area of the game quickly. Now moving on to Lavrina, she leads with a Gardevoir and a Corpus. I go for Body Slam and Thunder Punch, which Body Slam doesn't quite take down Gardevoir, which is unfortunate, but a Thunder Punch does finish it off, and I decide not to learn Detect. Out comes Roselia. Corpus uses Attract, but luckily I should be able to take down the fish using Thunder Punch, but Brick Break hits anyway, gets a crit and takes it down. Then out comes Farfetch. Now I do want to take this down as quick as possible, so this Thunder Punch does help, but that's because it has the Shadow Panic move that confuses both targets. I go for Body Slam to take down the Roselia, bring out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Altaria. Thunder Punch finishes off the Farfetch'd, and now all I need to do is take down Altaria. I go for Body Slam, not dealing that much, but Ice Punch is 4 times effective and also doesn't finish it off. Luckily, I am able to finish it off here, and we beat Lavrina pretty easily. And oh, hello there, Hitmonchan. Goodbye, Hitmonchan. And oh, hello there, Hitmonlee. Goodbye, Hitmonlee. Anyway, at level 51, Hitmonlee gets Reversal, a move that deals more damage the lower your health is. And while I don't think it's the best type of move, my Jump Kick hasn't been very kind to me, and I think it's just going to be better overall. So I decide to get rid of High Jump Kick, and move on to the battle against Snattle. He leads with a Quagsire and a Matang, and I go for Brick Break into the Quagsire to try to take it down immediately, which with an Ice Punch I do. Then out comes Scizor. Matang uses Psychic, not really doing that much damage surprisingly. Brick Break nearly takes down Matang in a single hit, and a Fire Punch is more than enough to take down Scizor. Out comes Soul Rock. Now I do need to take this down immediately because it sets up Shadow Sky on the first turn, which I really don't want to deal with. Brick Break takes it down to yellow, and a Sky Uppercut finishes it off, bringing out Cast Farm. Matang uses another Psychic, luckily not into Hitmonchan, so it survives another turn. Brick Break takes down Cast Farm, and then he sends out his Shadow Storm me. Fire Punch finishes off Matang, and then all that's left is said Shadow Storm me, which Body Slam takes it down to half. It does outspeed, but luckily doesn't take down Hitmonchan, and it goes down to a Thunder Punch. Moving on to Ardos, he leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam. Luckily, Hitmonlee should be faster than Alakazam, which it is, but not faster than Swallow, which is a bit unfortunate. Out comes Kingdra. Sky Uppercut nearly takes down Swallow in a single hit, but unfortunately because it survived, there's a good chance it's going to be going for Shadow half this turn, which it does, bringing both of my Pokemon to half health, but also bringing Kingdra down to half health, enough for Brick Break to take it down, and so I go for Fire Punch into the oncoming Heracross, which unfortunately doesn't do as much damage as I thought it would. I go for Body Slam to finish it off, and then out comes Electabuzz, and I go for Thunder Punch to finish off the bird. So then out comes his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Snorlax. Now hopefully Shadow Electabuzz will actually work with me and use Shadow Mist, because I really want to double into the Snorlax to guarantee it goes down. Luckily it does cooperate, so I'm able to get a Brick Break and Sky Uppercut off, taking Snorlax down, and then all that's left is the Electabuzz, which I do have Earthquake for, and I decided to swap into Hitmontop. That's because it's more defensive and it needs the experience, but I might have misjudged the power. Anyway, moving on to Gorgon, he leads with a Slowking and an Ursaring. I go for Body Slam into the Slowking and Thunder Punch, nearly taking it down. It hits an Earthquake, dealing a little bit of damage. I go for Brick Break and it takes down the Ursaring. And then out comes Aggron. Thunder Punch finishes off the Slowking, bringing out Walrein. And I decide to Thunder Punch and Sky Uppercut into the Walrein, which, despite its bulk, only one Brick Break is needed. Then out comes Shadow Poliwrath. Go for Sky Uppercut, taking it down below half. And then I decide to go for Earthquake, which takes down Poliwrath and also takes down the Aggron, leaving his final Pokemon, Shadow Mr. Mime, wide open for an attack, which Sky Uppercut takes it down below half. I go for Body Slam, finishing it off, and we beat Gorgon. Now I decide to teach Protect over Fire Punch, and then I go into the battle against Eldis. He leads with a Ninjask and a Shadow Manectric. I decide to go for Earthquake and Ice Punch, and that's because if this works, which unfortunately I get a crit on my own partner, but if it works well enough, it'll give me a lot of momentum going forward. Unfortunately, Salamence isn't a one-shot, but luckily with Body Slam it goes down, and then out comes Flygon, which is more than likely a one-shot. And then out comes Marowak. Now Shadow Marowak is always a threat because it threatens to do a ton of damage. I go for Protect, which luckily it decided to try to use Aerial Ace into Hitmonchan, same with the Marowak. I go for Ice Punch, which Ninjask didn't like, and takes down Hitmonchan. I bring out Hitmontop, go for Brick Break, which doesn't quite finish off Marowak, and then all that's left is Hitmontop, which unfortunately doesn't really have the strength or durability to survive all the Pokemon coming up, but it won't go down without a fight. Aerial Ace takes me down to half. I go for Hidden Power Fighting, which takes Lapras down pretty far before eventually getting taken down. Now going into the battle once again, and the only real difference is the fact that I decide to use Protect on the first turn, and while that does guarantee that I'm not going to get a crit or deal damage to the Hitmonchan, but at the same time I'm giving up the potential to deal a lot of damage to Salamence right off the bat without taking a lot of damage, which Salamence does hit back, dealing a lot of damage. I get a crit, taking it down, and then out comes Flygon. And at this point, since Hitmonlee can't really do anything anyway, I decide to try to check if Ninjask wouldn't protect that turn, because it sees a KO on Hitmonlee, but it decides to anyway. and takes it down the following turn. I bring out Hitmontop, lowering its attack, and go for Ice Punch, which gets a crit, taking Marowak down immediately, which is very fortunate. Out comes the Shadow Lapras once again. I go for Sky Uppercut and Hidden Power into it, which nearly takes it down, leaving it on just a sliver. It sets up Shadow Sky, unfortunately. So now we will be taking chip damage. I go for Ice Punch to try to take down the Ninjask. It survives on just a little bit of HP as well. Hidden Power finishes off the Lapras though, and the Fruity Pebbles end up saving the day, taking Ninjask down as well. Moving on to the big box legendary, Shadowlugia. And honestly, I am a little bit worried about this one because Body Slam is my best move, and Ice Punch is kind of my best move, not really doing much with either. And neither of my Pokemon can really take these hits all that well, so they will be going into the final battle extremely hurt. But with Lugia down, I go into the battle against Greevil. He leads with a Shadow Rhydon and Moltres. I go for Body Slam, dealing a little bit of damage, and unfortunately the Rhydon this time has Lightning Rod, which is very unfortunate. I go for Sky Uppercut and Brick Break to take down the Rhydon, but it only needs a Brick Break to do. Out comes Executor, which doesn't take too much damage from the Sky Uppercut, and Hitmonchan is taken down by a Shadow Fire. And then I go for Body Slam into the Moltres as well as Double Edge, just to deal as much damage as I can, but Double Edge does so little damage. Shadow Fire hits, taking Hitmonlee down. Luckily Hitmontop should be strong enough to finish the job, which it does, getting me another level, but not before Tauros comes out, and Shadow Storm hits, taking me down from nearly full health. Okay, well that's not great. I decided to teach it Swagger over Counter, maybe it'll be more handy, and I go into the battle against Greevil once again, this now being the 6th attempt. Because I know Brick Break takes down Rhydon in a single hit, I can take it down immediately, bringing out Executor, and now Thunder Punch can actually hit its target without me having to rely on that 30% chance of failure. Go for Body Slam, and another Thunder Punch to finish it off. And then out comes Tauros. Shadow Wind misses. And another thing I learned through all these levels is that Brick Break can take down Tauros. Out comes Articuno, which is always very threatening. Thunder Punch does a little bit of damage to it. Shadow Wind takes Hitmonlee down to 18 HP, which is actually great because Reversal is now very powerful. Not enough to take down Articuno, and in fact it survives on a sliver. But luckily Hitmonlee still survives, and go for Brick Break to finish it off, and then I go for Ice Punch to hit the incoming Zapdos, which it does a decent amount of damage. Go for Body Slam and another Ice Punch, and Shadow Bolt hits, taking Hitmonchan down to 40 HP. Zapdos goes down. All that's left is the Executor, which finishes off Hitmonchan, bring out Hitmontop, and I lower its attack. Body Slam finishes it off, and we beat Greevil. So how well did the Hitmons actually do? Well, they beat the game at a time of 9 hours 55 minutes and 6 seconds, with the end levels being Chan at 59, Lee at 60, and Top at 40, and with 9 feints overall, only one of those being to a random trainer, the other 8 all being to bosses. So I think overall these 3 do very well. However, I do think that there is one of them that is just worse than the other 2, and that is unfortunately Hitmontop. With a lower attack stat, it doesn't really do as much, and even though it's a pretty good wall with the Intimidate ability, it's not nearly as useful overall as the other 2, and that mainly comes down to the fact that Hitmonchan just has the elemental punches, which is just always nice for type coverage, considering that I would only have normal, fighting, and dark if I went to the mover laner to get any other types. And I think that leads into the second issue with these Pokemon, is the fact that their type coverage isn't great, and even though they are very strong, there are many battles where it slows down to a crawl because either you have to use Mimic in the early game to get past ghost types, or you need to use the elemental punches, which are good, but only off of a 35 special attack stat isn't amazing, so it takes multiple hits, which means more and more time is added up. And that can be said for a bit of the training as well, because you don't really want to leave Hitmontop behind. You do have to do a little bit of side training for it as well, which does waste a little bit of time. And while Tyrogue isn't a great Pokemon, it does a serviceable job in the early game until it gets to level 20, so I can't really call it too bad, but it's definitely not amazing. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!